Could be here with us, whether you're here in Seattle or somewhere else. We're glad that you are connecting with us. Today's the last message in the series called Represent Our Core Values as well. We represent who we are, but we also have to represent the ideas that they with all of us. You know, if you've been tagging along at all with us, that our mission at Restoration is to lead people to become fully devoted followers of Yeshua. And our logo at Restoration is 6 arrows that point in. And the reason why they point inward is because restoration happens on the inside so that we can participate with God in helping people restore the outside. And every congregation has things that make them distinct and unique. And these are the 6 things that we care about, kind of a filter that we run everything that we do at Restoration through our mission and our core values. But the truth is, as we've said throughout this series, you cannot grow spiritually in your faith in Yeshua without participating in community with other people, because you need other people to spur you on in your growth, and you are designed to spur others on in their growth. So today we're going to talk about what it means to represent better together. This is a tough time in the world for words like unity, togetherness, one body. And the truth is, we are, as our core value states, we are better together. But that also means that if we're better together, then we are worse alone. Now, this isn't a reference to people who are single or a desire to tell everybody that they have to be married. The point is, we are designed for community with other people. And in this time of history and in this time of the world, there's a phrase from the days of the pioneers that they circle the wagons. When you circle a wagon, it's because you set up a circle to keep everybody on the inside to protect us from the stuff outside of the circle of wagons protecting us. The difficulty is we've all circled our wagons around us and our own units. And it's bigger than that. We're supposed to protect our own. Circling the wagons actually makes sense in a time of confusion and disorientation, but we need to circle the wagons a little larger into community, not just our family. So I've said the last few weeks live in our services at Restoration what Rabbi Dan Juster said to me about 12, 13 years ago. He said, no matter what decision you make as a leader, you will always have people who say this service or what we do as a community is too Jewish, not Jewish enough. It's either too charismatic or it's not charismatic enough. And no matter what decision we ever make, no matter what thing we ever choose to do, there's always going to be people on every side. But we are designed to belong. And most of the time, the things that frustrate us and make us upset are actually distractions from the things that are really important. Like as we were preparing to film this message, I didn't bring my other hat that I would have wore that matched this outfit better, and it threw me off, and I went around looking for this other hat, and Matt Kyle, one of our elders, just said, why don't you just wear the stupid hat you're wearing? And that makes sense because you don't care about what hat I'm wearing. I care about it. And some of you care as you connect with. Just saw how my shoes and my shirt matched last week. But we get distracted from the things that really matter on things that don't actually matter at all, that seem to matter. And the reason for those distractions keep us from the things that actually matter. We were designed to belong, but most of us feel like we don't. And sometimes it's because of the surrounding circumstances. Sometimes it's because it's hard to connect with another group of people. And sometimes it's the fault of the group. But a lot of times it's also on us that we are determined to not belong. And being determined to not belong, well, don't belong. End up alone. But we're better together because we're worse alone. And even in terms of family or marriage, like those things aren't the point, but everyone, no matter what station or part of life that you are in. You're designed to be with other people. And it's probably a better reason to call ourselves messianic because it's all messy. And relationship with people and community, it's hard. It happened actually on the phone this week with an old friend who I've known most of my life. And we hadn't talked for a few years, and we connected and realized that both of us being in our 40s and our kids being about the same age, that we were having very similar issues with our kids and our lives and the things that we're each working through, counseling and in our 40s. And it kept like going back and forth to, well, at least somebody else going through the things that I'm going through, and it's not just me. And a few times I was like, sorry if this is discouraging, but I guess we're just walking through the same thing. And he said, and I said a few times, it's actually kind of encouraging because I thought I was alone. And you're not. Some of you are literally alone, and you feel alone, and that's because you are. And even some of us with families often feel alone, even though we're surrounded by other people. Some with families wish they were alone. Right? There's everybody, whatever season or station you are. The idea is we are designed to be better together as human beings, and that means that we're worse alone. It's why we gather together on Saturday mornings, and why we want to draw people into a community where they feel that they belong. It's why when people come to Restoration in Seattle, we say welcome home, because we want to be a family, a spiritual family. We want to encourage people to participate in something that's hard but also rewarding. And it was hard to not gather for 15 months in person, which we did as a community. But also in that same time, we found that many people in our community cared for each other really well. And some people decided not to come back, and some people decided to come back, and new people have shown up, and people who we've loved have moved away. We talked about last week in the message with Jonah. It's not so much the things that are happening that make us upset. It's underlying issues that all of us have, that being in community doesn't solve, but being alone makes those things work. Being in community, healthy community, which is hard to find and hard to do and hard to lead and hard to be, because, well, community is made up of people who are all wounded, hurting, and feel like they don't. And in this season, some people who are part of our community in Seattle haven't come back yet because it's just hard to be in groups of people because of all the things that are happening with COVID. That's why we have an app. That's why people can still connect with things that are happening in our community. Some people aren't ready to jump in. And some people are ready to attend, but they're not ready to help. They're not able to serve because of all the anxieties that are happening around us. And nobody's right and nobody's wrong on these issues. They're just hard. What we know for sure is we need each other, because we're better together and we're worse alone. It's why I have so many, and I know many of you do as well, but I'm very intentional about FaceTiming with friends and elder meetings that we have, and speaking to mentors about things that are happening in my life. It's why we have 2 overseeing elders in our community who oversee our elders. Why they're called elder overseers, because they oversee our elders. They're not their role is not to field disagreements for people in the community with us. The role is for them to help us lead better and to encourage our leaders and our elders. That's why I go to counseling on a regular basis. That's why we have had, and even during COVID, we had connect groups, and even connect groups on Zoom, and we're trying to restructure those groups so we can launch them again in early 2022. It's why I belong to pastors networks, both in Seattle and outside of Seattle, because we need other people, and we need to be intentional about our need for other people. It's in the context of marriage and companionship in Genesis 2 verse 8, but I think it still applies here. It says, "Then Adonai said to Adam, 'It's not good for man to be alone, so let me make a well-matched helper for him.'" And it's that phrase that I want to pinpoint on. It's not good for man to be alone. It's not good. It's not our design. And it is about marriage with Adam and Eve, and it's about the marriage relationship. And this is not a judgment on anyone who is single, because many of you feel like it's not good for you to be alone either. The idea is, generally speaking, the design that God put into us is not to be alone, or to live life with other people, being better together, same as being worse alone. And this is what representing better together means. We are better together. It's what Paul spends his time in the book of Ephesians telling people in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 7. He says, but to each one of us, grace was given in keeping with the measure of Messiah's gift. And I love that, but to each one of us, grace was given. Grace for what? What is Paul speaking to here? He's saying each one of us have been given a grace in keeping with the measure of Messiah's gift. And I think we each have a personal sphere of grace that's been given to us. It's confidence in the grace of God, and it's living out your special measure of grace. Like, what gifts has God given you, and how do you use those gifts? How do you express those gifts? There's a personal sphere of grace that God calls each individual to live out. Ephesians 1 and verse 1, Paul says that he's about himself. He says, I'm Paul, an emissary of Messiah Yeshua, by God's will, to the holy people in Ephesus, those trusting in Messiah Yeshua. And this personal sphere of grace that Paul is talking about is sort of simple. In the statement, in his introduction in the letter, he's saying, look, I'm Paul, that's who I am. I'm an emissary, an apostle, that's what I do. I'm of Messiah Yeshua, that's who I do it for. And it's by God's will, because that's my authority. And it's to the holy people of Ephesus, that is the audience. Same way, my living out my special grace of a special measure of grace is Matt is who I am, which is funny. People call me Rabbi Matt all the time, or just Rabbi, and that's okay because I am a rabbi. But you understand, my mom didn't name me Rabbi. I mean, my dad probably would have, because he wanted us all to be rabbis. But my mom didn't name me Rabbi. They named me Matt. My name is Matt. That's always who I'll be, whether I am a rabbi or not. Being a rabbi is what I do, because the word rabbi means teacher, and that's what I do. I teach, and I am of Messiah Yeshua. That's who I teach for, because he told me to, not for anybody actually listening. And it's by God's will, because that's what God has asked me to do. And it's to people who are far from God and people who want to become more fully devoted followers of Yeshua. That's my audience. That's the special measure of grace that God has given me. And I wonder, what's your special measure of grace? What has God made you to be? Because you're not defined by what you do, but by who you are. And many people get stuck being defined by what they do, their job, and not understanding more deeply who you know, who you are, what God called you to do. Do you know what your gifts are, how to use them? Healthy community helps you find yourself. Whether you're part of Restoration and you're trying to find yourself here, or you're watching from somewhere else and you're not really part of a community, it's the necessity of needing other people to help you figure out you, and what you are called to do, and who you are, and the things, who you are and what you're called to do. You know, who you spend your time with helps find you, good and bad. The people like our moms used to say when we were kids, you are what you eat. Well, you are who you hang out with. And you need healthy people in your life, a healthy community in your life, to help you figure out what your special measure of grace is for you. It's what it means when we talk about representing the idea of being better together, and the phrase that we are better together. So in the same sense that there's a personal sphere of grace, there's also a corporate sphere of grace. It's living out our special measure of grace together. So while individuals have a special measure of grace, so community has a special measure of grace together. Restoration is who we are. A synagogue is from the Greek to assemble. Synagogue is what we do. We assemble together, not just on Saturdays, but all the time when people in community gather together. We are messianic because we're followers of Yeshua, which is what messianic means. This is who we do it for, is the one we're following and the one we want to be like, Yeshua, our Messiah. It's by God's will that this is our authority, and our audience is to Seattle and to whoever would listen from outside of. So in the same sense, what's our special measure of grace as a community? And for covenant members and regular attenders, as we've gone through, if you haven't listened to the whole series, you just go back and listen to all of our core values. But this is our special measure of grace, to lead people to become fully devoted followers of Yeshua. How do we do that? Our core values. We are messianic. We reflect the Jewishness of Yeshua. We are family. Everyone belongs in the family of God. We are forgiven. Every setback is a chance to come back. We are generous. We are rationally generous with our resources. We are servants. We serve God by serving others. And together, we are better together. Why? Because being better together, flip side, we're worse alone. We can all do the things that we do, and we can sort of do them well. And there are things that we do well, and there's things that we don't do well. But it's not until we connect with other people that fill the gaps of the things we don't do well and the things they do well that we gather together as teams and as a community that live out the special measure of grace that's been given, both a personal measure of grace, and also the combination of all of these personal special measure of graces that God gives to individuals. He then connects in community so that as a community together, we could operate in a special measure of grace that he has given us. It's right in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 1. Paul says, "Therefore I, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling." It's funny. I remember 23 years ago, Professor Tom Domworth at Nyack College called my attention to this. Said in a class on the prison epistles, which some of you are like, "Oh, class on the..." Yeah, there are letters that Paul wrote when he was in prison, of which Ephesians is one of them, and we did a whole class just on the letters that he wrote in prison. And when I was in Rome at the end of 2019, I got to sit in the prison where he wrote those epistles by church tradition. But this idea that Paul says, look, I want to urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you were called. Worthy of the calling for which. Worthy calling you were called. See, God calls people to do things, and when he calls us to do things, he also gives us everything we need to be worthy of the call, and if God called you, then you are worthy of that calling. And it's a high calling on your life that God gives, because this personal sphere of grace connects to a corporate sphere of grace, which even restoration as a community is part of a larger corporate sphere of grace that connects us to a larger messianic movement and then a larger body of Messiah, which some call the capital C church, that we are connected to these other pieces. We have a sphere of grace that God gives us as individuals that connects to a group of people as restoration, that connects us to a larger group of the body of Messiah, through which God is moving in this time and in this place and in this season to remind people that we're better together, worse. Ephesians 4 verse 2 says, "It is with complete humility and gentleness, with patience, putting up with one another in love, making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." With complete humility and gentleness, with patience, putting up with one another in love, making every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Doesn't that sound like everything that's happening in the world right now? Oh, that's sarcasm. That doesn't feel like anything that any of us are doing. But even if we're not doing it, this is what Paul says through in the scripture, but it doesn't matter because there is one body and one spirit, just as you were called in the hope of your calling. There's one Lord and one faith and one immersion and one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But to each one of us, grace was given, keeping measure. I mean, this is what's so interesting to me, even the word humility, which I've said several times throughout this series, that humility is a modest or low view of one's own importance. It doesn't mean you don't realize you're good at something and you don't talk about the things that you're good at. I know what I'm good at. That doesn't mean I'm not humble. Humbleness is knowing that I'm not the answer to any of your problems. I'm not the answer to any of my problems. I'm not the answer to any of my wife's problems, to any of my kids' problems. I'm not the answer. I know where to find the answer. And sometimes it's hard because we get so distracted by all these other things that are meant to deter us from the things that really matter. Paul says in these verses, you put up with one another in love. I just love the way that plays out in English. Put up with one another, right? It's not just like hug each other and love each other. It's, gosh, I really don't like this person. I'm going to put up with them. And somebody's putting up with me. It's mostly Laura, but we put up with one another in love. Why? Because we want to keep unity and the bond of peace. And we want to keep this grace keeping with the measure of Messiah's gift, that he's given us these great gifts to use for the edification, the encouragement of each other and of the body of Messiah. I talked about last week in the message on serving, representing, serving God, that we don't want to be like Jonah, who does the opposite of everything he's supposed to do, to be more like Yeshua, who gave himself for us. And in that sacrifice that he made for us, he gives us gifts so that we can encourage one another, things he's called us to. Ephesians 4, verse 11 says, he himself gave some to be emissaries and some prophets and some as proclaimers of the good news and some as shepherds and teachers to equip the Kedeshim for the work, the holy people for the work of service, for building up Messiah. From him the whole body is fitted and held together in every supporting ligament. The proper working of each individual part produces the body's growth for the building itself up love. Why? Why does God all of that for us? Why does he give us all of these things? Better together, worse alone. At Restoration, we believe that better together. And it's such a hard season and it's such a hard time because everybody's trying to figure out what they're able to do and what they can do and what their boundaries are. We realized that there were so many things before COVID that were unhealthy, that we thought were healthy, that we now understand as unhealthy. But how do you fix what was unhealthy and turn it healthy? You have to reorganize everything. You got to recreate teams. You got to rebuild a community. How do we do all of those things? And the answer is better together. None of this depends on me. None of this depends on Ibars, our assistant rabbi, or Matt Guile, our elder. None of it depends on Kelly, our treasurer, or Katrina, our children's leader, or any of the things that anyone does. It can't ever depend on just one individual because that's not the design. Design is we're better together. And it's hard because there's so many other things. There's so many things that are just easy to do by myself. I'll just do it because I don't really want to involve anybody else. We all do it. We all say it. There's a power in the design that God put in us to need other people, to surround ourselves by the right people, to surround ourselves with people and make each other better because we're better. I'm super excited about the message is going to follow this series on being all in for the gospel. And then the series that's going to follow that and take us through the rest of 2021, the series that Ibars and I are going to work on together on the person of Joseph in the book of Genesis and the faithfulness of Joseph, really difficult story. And words that follow Joseph everywhere he goes in every hard thing. It says, and the Lord was with him. The Lord is with us. And the Lord is with you. The Lord is with everyone who calls on his name. God's not calling us to fix anything. He's the one doing the fixing. But he does call us to participate by being faithful to things he's asked us in our personal sphere of grace, corporate sphere of grace, to understand that better. Let me pray for you. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity to break down your word. Practical message. Help us be all the things that you've created us to be. Individuals, but also as grateful that even in difficult times and difficult circumstances of the things that are happening in this world, that you never leave your people behind. Call us, live lives worthy, calling, which love you, Lord. We're grateful for all you've done for us. Pray that you continue to move in our hearts and minds. More, our Messiah, Yeshua. In his name we pray. See you next week.